So this is the Asus ProArt P16 laptop, and this is the Asus ProArt PX13 laptop. And these are kind of like the MacBooks of Windows. At least that's what it seems like based on a bunch of videos you'll see online about these laptops, because not only are these directly compared to MacBooks, but they are also just generally called the creator laptops. And it makes sense because they are part of Asus ProArt series, which is focused towards creators. So as a creator myself and a Mac user, these caught my attention. I wanted to see what do these have to offer. So after having these for a couple of months, using them, testing them, I want to answer one question in this video. How close do these come to a MacBook-like experience and performance? Or are they better or worse? Well, that's what I want to answer in this video. Now, just to give you a little bit of context, I've been almost exclusively on Mac for the past year and a half. And over that time, I've used all kinds of Mac, everything from your base model machines like your M1 processors to pro level chips like M1 Max, and even the latest and almost greatest M4 Pro chip. So I think I have a pretty good idea of what's going on the Mac side of things. However, on the Windows side of things, over the past year or so, a lot of things have changed, especially in terms of ARM-based processors, because a year ago, that was not really a thing on Windows, but now they're like everywhere. And these laptops also have ARM processors, just like MacBooks. But when it comes to build quality and the design, it's actually really good. It's very premium and high quality. I love this black color. You don't see any fingerprints. There are also no weird RGBs all around, which is something I really like. The design is just simple and minimal. Now, despite this being a 16-inch laptop, it's not very heavy. I think it's just under 2 kilograms, and it's also not very thick. I mean, it's not the thinnest laptop you'll ever see, but it's thin enough to be very portable. I can easily fit this in my backpack and, carry it all day around without any problems. There are also a ton of ports. You have a headphone jack, USB-A, USB-C, 4.0, 2.1 HDMI. On the other side, you have a full-size SD card reader, which is huge for creators. This camera right now is recording on an SD card, so I can pull that out and put it right into this laptop, which is amazing. There's another USB-A and a USB-C. So it's safe to say you probably won't need any dongles with this laptop. And that's nice. I also love the keyboard. In fact, I think it's better than my MacBook. This has a little bit more key travel, which makes the overall typing experience a lot better. The trackpad, however, is not as good as I would like it to be. Yes, it's nice and big, which is something I was genuinely shocked to see when I unboxed this computer and saw the trackpad for the first time. However, I think Asus really missed out on making this a haptic trackpad. This is like your old school clicky trackpad with physical buttons. So coming from a MacBook, this will definitely feel like a downgrade, and it does to me. But I think if Asus can make this a haptic trackpad, this will really go from like a B tier trackpad to like an S tier trackpad. You'll also notice this wheel over here in the corner, and this is really nice. You turn it on by swiping down from this corner, and the idea is that for different apps, you can assign different tools to this wheel. For example, in Photoshop, you can have a brush, a pen, and maybe like a rectangle shape tool. So every time you need to use those tools, you can just rotate this wheel to access them, which is much quicker than moving your mouse to each one of them. And then we have the screen. This is a 16-inch 4K OLED screen, and it's a touch screen, and it's a color accurate screen, which is actually very important, especially for creators, because we're always editing photos, videos, and whatnot. So it's actually something that's very essential to our workflow and something that's often overlooked. This screen also goes up to 500 nits. I think in the worst case scenario, you'll probably find yourself using it in a very bright room or maybe like a bright window right behind you. And for those kind of scenarios, I think you should be fine. The two downsides of this screen that I have noticed though, one is this hinge. I feel like this could be better. It's a little too flimsy for my liking, so this could be improved. And number two, right out the box, this screen is not as color accurate as a MacBook. The colors are a little bit more saturated and vibrant, which actually looks better, but it's not color accurate. But you can fix that in settings and you can get it to look very close to a MacBook. If you were to calibrate the screen, it would be perfect. Now, speaking of the screen, the thing that you look at the most, one way to make it look really nice almost all the time is to have a really nice wallpaper. I think we can all agree on that. So the ones you see in this video are some that we recently launched. The links below, check them out. I'm sure you're gonna love them. Some of you asked about them in a previous video, where to get them. Well, now you know. Now, arguably one of the most important thing on any laptop or computer is the performance. Well, this is where things get a little bit interesting because we know that on Windows, you get the max performance on any laptop when you plug it in. On battery, it's not at its peak performance. So while running on battery, this is the kind of results you can expect. And it's nothing really impressive. I mean, the GPU scores are not bad, but multi-core and single core performance is kind of disappointing. I mean, it's worse than an M1 processor. However, once you plug it in, then you really see what this laptop is capable of. The performance increase is just massive. Like the single core performance goes up by like 60%, multi-core goes up by roughly 50%, and GPU also gets like 25% faster. And these numbers are comparable to an M3 Pro, and for GPU, it scores even higher than an M3 Max. And that's because of the dedicated GPU inside this laptop. And it shows. And another huge difference here that you may not realize immediately is that on MacBooks or just M processors in general, they have unified memory. So if you are doing a CPU intensive task and if the computer has, let's say 32 gigs of memory, the CPU can use all of that. But let's say if you're doing a GPU intensive task, the GPU inside the M processors can use all of that memory. However, if you're doing something that requires both, then you have a problem because either your GPU or CPU won't have enough resources to work with. However, on this P16 laptop, the RTX 4070 has its own memory and the CPU has its own memory. That could make a huge difference in some scenarios. Now, I should probably mention that all these numbers that I talked about are benchmarks at the end of the day. Real world usage is also something that really matters. So of course, I used the P16 to edit a couple of videos, and overall, I would say my experience was pretty good. It seems to handle all my footage just fine, 4K 10-bit 422. However, I feel like after a while of editing, my timeline seems to get a little bit choppy, which isn't something I experience on Mac. So the overall experience of editing is not quite as smooth as it is for me on Mac. But it's important to note that there are a lot of variables at play over here. It could be the video codec, it could be my editing software Premiere Pro, which is known to be very buggy a lot of times, and it could just be Windows, maybe an update or something at that time. Could be many things. So I can't say for sure that it's the laptop because I also tested Photoshop and it works perfectly fine. And even Blender, it actually was able to render 2 scenes significantly faster than my M4 Pro over here, which is almost the latest and greatest chip available from Apple. So that's huge. And not to mention gaming capabilities. Despite this being a very much creator-focused laptop, it can game very well actually. I tried playing Fortnite on the absolute highest settings possible, and I was consistently able to get like 60 frames per second, which is the highest frame rate this screen is capable of showing. So I consider that really good performance. Now, one of the downsides of having to plug this computer in for the maximum performance is noise, because the fans really kick in and you can hear them. Compared to a MacBook, you could be doing the most intensive task and you'll barely hear the fans, and you don't have to have it plugged in all the time. But the MacBook then also doesn't have a dedicated GPU, so you know, you lose some, you gain some. It's kind of like that. So yes, the fans are audible, but it really is when you are doing something that is actually graphically intensive, like editing a video or maybe rendering, you know, a scene in Blender or something like that. Because like I mentioned, I used Photoshop and it was running perfectly fine and I couldn't really hear the fans. And even though Photoshop is not quite as intensive graphically as video editing, you still need a fairly decent PC to use Photoshop, especially if you have some larger projects. So, you know, even if you're doing something like coding, I would say, or, you know, using Excel or Microsoft Word, stuff like that, you won't hear the fans. So it's really only for actually graphically intensive things. In terms of the battery life, if you're going to use this for like browsing, watching videos, and just, you know, casually using the laptop, not doing anything really graphically intensive, then it will actually last you an entire day. However, the second you start doing something very graphically intensive, like editing or rendering a video on battery, it will run out of battery very quickly. Okay, now let's talk about the PX13, which is very similar to the P16. However, this is probably my favorite one. In terms of build quality, design, performance, this is very, very similar to the P16. The keyboard is the same. The trackpad is also nice and big, but also not a haptic trackpad over here. The screen's slightly different though. This is a 3K OLED screen compared to the 4K on the P16, but it's just as color accurate and gets just as bright. And in terms of the ports, this actually has two USB-C 4.0 ports compared to the one on this. So this is better. However, it only has a micro SD card slot and not a full-size SD card slot, which is worse than this. So just small differences. It still has the same processor, same GPU, just 32 gigs of RAM instead of 64 over here. Now, the reason why I personally think I'm liking this laptop more than the P16 is because, one, it's much more portable because it's smaller, but two, watch this. You see this? The P16 can't do this. So this is so much more versatile compared to the P16. I mean, good luck doing this to a MacBook. You'll break it for sure. This just makes this laptop like 10 times more fun and more useful, in my opinion. It's more enjoyable to watch content like this. You can hold it like this, use it like a tablet, and it's a decent sized tablet. Talking on video calls like this. I mean, there are a dozen more possibilities with just being able to fold the screen all the way around. And of course, you can draw on this using an Asus pen, which is also pretty good. And the best part is that you aren't missing out on a whole lot compared to the P16, and this laptop is cheaper. So this just feels like an overall better package to me, at least. I also tested gaming performance on this, and I was averaging around 50 to 60 frames per second. So basically the same. It's within the margin of error, I would say. And actually the hinge on this also feels a little bit more sturdier. The trackpad also feels better compared to the P16. I feel like it's much more easier to click the trackpad in different areas, even closer to the top. Now, recently I also made a video about the Surface Pro laptop, and the biggest thing I hate about that computer is that form factor, that two-in-one kind of form factor, which is what this computer is also trying to do. It's trying to be like a tablet and a computer at the same time, but the two different ways of achieving that makes a huge difference in my opinion. So if any company is going to go for that two-in-one design, I think this is the way to do it. Even the pen is much better in my opinion. The Microsoft pen is very flat and very slim. This is actually like a normal pencil and it feels better to hold. So I like this a lot more. So overall, I think these are really good laptops despite some of the drawbacks they have. And that's because if you consider the price, these are significantly cheaper than a MacBook equivalent. So this P16 I think costs around 3,500 Canadian dollars, but an M4 Max MacBook that's similarly spec'd is going to cost you around $6,000. Yes, it's not an apples to apples comparison. Ideally, you should be looking at the price for an M3 Pro, but that's not available anymore. So the closest we have is an M4 Pro. And yes, you do also get better performance in the M4 Pro, but again, the difference is just massive. Same thing for the PX13, a similarly spec'd 14-inch M4 Pro is going to cost you around 3,700 Canadian dollars, while this is around 2,800 Canadian dollars. So again, almost a $900 difference. And considering that, what I've been able to conclude is that if you need the GPU performance from these laptops, so if you're doing something that requires good GPU performance like 3D rendering, Blender, stuff like that, then I think it would be worth buying these laptops. Or maybe you're also into a little bit of gaming, then these will still be good options. However, if you're doing something that's more based on CPU performance, then you might be better off getting a MacBook, but then also be ready to spend a lot more extra. And gaming isn't really an option on MacBooks. But that's all for this video, and I'll see you later.